Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources you're wrestling with and really pull out the crucial insights.
That's the goal.
And today we're looking at a challenge so many organizations face. How do you actually navigate, well, complexity and rapid change?
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Our lens for this is Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World. It's a book you shared, and it seems really relevant as you're thinking about adapting maybe how you lead your own team in this fast-moving tech landscape.
Absolutely. And the book dives right into these fascinating real-world examples, high-stakes military stuff, but also the constant flux in business. It's trying to uncover some fundamental truths.
Okay, so what's the first big idea?
Well, right away, it tackles this core tension. The old management models, the ones built for, say, 20th century efficiency,
The ones we know, yeah.
they're increasingly stumbling. Our world now is just so interconnected, so volatile.
So the book says,
It puts it pretty starkly. Complexity at scale has rendered reductionist management ineffective. Efficiency is necessary, but no longer sufficient.
no longer sufficient. Okay, so efficiency alone isn't cutting it. Why? What's fundamentally changed?
It really boils down to agility, I think, and the impact of, well, distributed players.
Like startups versus big companies.
Exactly. A small, nimble startup can just disrupt an entire industry almost overnight now. Or think about decentralized networks. They can coordinate and react in ways a traditional hierarchy just can't.
Because those old systems are built for stability.
Precisely. They're geared for predictability, not the constant pivoting you need when the ground is always shifting. So the emphasis has to move away from trying to plan everything towards building an organization that can sense change, adapt to it, and learn, like in real time.
The book uses that task force experience in Iraq, right? Against Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or
Right.
PQI.
It's a powerful illustration. Here you have arguably the most elite special operations force on the planet,
The best of the best.
facing this, smaller, less conventionally equipped group. And initially, they really struggled.
Why? What was the mismatch?
Well, despite all their training, their resources, their traditional sort of top-down structure and planning just weren't effective against AQI's network.
Which was different, how?
It was dispersed, adaptable. The book mentions a really sobering case where they failed to prevent civilian deaths, highlighting how their established methods just fell short against this new kind of threat.
And AQI wasn't like a standard army, no clear general giving orders.
Not really, no. Zarqali was a key figure, sure, but the real strength was its decentralized nature. It wasn't about one leader. When the task force tried to map it out, their intelligence board showed these incredibly complex, tangled networks, not the neat siloed charts they were used to.
I mean, like those MEC diagrams, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive.
Exactly. This was the opposite of MEC. It was messy, overlapping.
So AQI didn't deliberately design the structure, it just happened.
That seems to be the key insight. The task force felt it had evolved through ongoing adaptation, constantly reshaping itself under pressure.
Like natural selection for organizations.
Kind of. The book uses this interesting analogy from immunology, actually, about how environmental changes can sometimes inadvertently strengthen attackers in complex systems, like how a weakened immune system allows infections to thrive.
That makes sense. A less resilient system creates openings, and this reflects bigger shifts, right? The world getting flatter, faster.
Absolutely. Barriers to entry are lower everywhere. Small players, if they're connected, can have a massive impact.
The book lists people like Mark Zuckerberg.
Right, or Justin Bieber, or even Zarqali himself. Different fields, same principle. Interconnectedness amplifies influence, regardless of your initial size.
So the whole operating environment is just fundamentally different from the 20th century.
It really is. The book draws that parallel. It's like a Fortune 500 company suddenly trying to fight off a whole swarm of super agile startups. The old playbook just doesn't work.
Okay, so if that top-down, super planned approach doesn't work with complexity, what does? Does history offer any clues?
It does, and the book brings up Lord Nelson at Trafalgar. It's a great example.
Okay, Nelson, how did he approach it?
Well, instead of trying to micromanage every single ship's movement from the flagship,
Which would be impossible in battle anyway.
totally impossible, he fostered initiative among his captains. That famous signal, England expects that every man will do his duty. It wasn't a detailed order. It was about shared purpose.
And he had a general plan.
A simple one. Get in close, break their line, disrupt their plans. His advice was basically, get your ship alongside one of theirs and you can't go too far wrong.
Empowering the captains on the spot.
Exactly. And the result? A stunning victory. The British didn't lose a single ship. It shows the power of distributed decision-making, but within a clear strategic intent.
That's worlds away from the kind of clockwork military planning the book also talks about, like planning a parachute assault.
Oh, absolutely. The level of detail, the synchronization required there is immense. Every second is planned.
And that reflects that historical military focus on discipline, standardization.
Right. They mentioned Baron von Steuben drilling Washington's troops at Valley Forge, creating uniformity, predictability.
You must have seen that in the Ranger Regiment with the SOPs.
Oh, definitely. Standard operating procedures for everything, down to, exactly where your canteen goes on your gear.
And it sounds crazy, but in high-stress situations.
It's vital. You need to know where things are without thinking. Same reason parachute packing is so rigorous. Lives depend on that standardization.
But that drive for standardization and efficiency wasn't just military, right? The book brings in Frederick Winslow Taylor?
Yes, Taylor in scientific management. His whole focus was optimizing industrial work, breaking tasks down, timing everything, finding the one best way to do it.
Like with shoveling coal or machining parts.
Exactly. And he got huge productivity gains. The examples are pretty striking.
But didn't workers hate being treated like machines?
Oh yeah, there's definitely resistance, feeling like just a cog.
Yeah.
But Taylor often managed to find new workers because the efficiency gains meant he could pay more. So it was complex.
And his ideas spread far beyond the factory floor.
Hugely influential. Into military planning, that idea of war by timetable and management theory itself. Peter Drucker apparently credited Taylor's influence as helping defeat the Nazis.
Wow. So it became this dominant way of thinking.
It really did. Reducing management to scientific principles, you had figures like Fayol, Gulick, Erwick building on it. Taylor himself genuinely thought this mental revolution would bring peace and cooperation.
Efficiency as the ultimate goal.
It became seen as the highest good in the early 20th century. And the task force, initially, their approach was kind of like that.
How so?
The book calls their initial setup an awesome machine for counterterrorism. Highly efficient, meticulously planned, learning lessons from past failures like Operation Eagle Claw, where coordination broke down.
But that machine, however awesome, hit a wall with AQI's complexity.
Precisely. Which brings us neatly to complexity science itself.
Right, the butterfly effect.
Exactly, Lorenz's idea. Tiny changes, having massive, unpredictable consequences down the line. That's the essence of complexity.
So technically, complexity means
Lots of diverse, connected parts interacting frequently. This leads to extreme volatility, makes prediction incredibly hard. Think weather, ecosystems.
economies.
Economies, absolutely.
Yeah.
Small event, big ripple effect you didn't see coming.
The book uses chess as an analogy, right? You
Yeah.
can't just have an instruction card.
No way. The number of possible moves, interactions, it explodes so quickly, it just overwhelms any attempt at simple prediction. A reductionist plan is useless.
And modern technology, communications, travel, they make this worse.
Well, they amplify it, they create denser connections, faster interactions. Your granddaughter, Emilu, growing up digital, she lives in this hyper-connected world instinctively.
Or that example of the LA Times robot reporting an earthquake instantly.
Right. Information moves incredibly fast. So these technologies give us amazing capabilities, but they also crank up the nonlinearity, the unpredictability.
It's not like a simple three-ball problem on a pool table anymore.
It's like hundreds of collisions happening constantly. And trying to apply old mechanical Newtonian models to things like national economies.
It doesn't work. Hayek argued that, didn't he?
Yes. Hayek stressed you can't just engineer an economy because of all the individual decisions being made by millions of interconnected people. Butterfly effects everywhere.
That John Urry quote nails it. When China gets a cold, the U.S. sneezes.
Perfect summary of global interconnectedness. And this leads to what the book calls predictive hubris.
Thinking we can figure it all out if we just get enough data.
Yeah, but the track record isn't great. They cite stats on forecasting errors, how economists missed the 2008 crash.
Right, the survey of professional forecasters.
Didn't see it coming. And history is littered with the failures of centrally planned economies trying to force things into a neat, predictable box. It just doesn't fit reality.
Okay, so if prediction is flawed and just throwing more data or tech at it isn't the silver bullet, what's the alternative?
The alternative the book champions is resilience.
Resilience, okay.
They point to the task force again. They had tons of data in Iraq. Drone feeds, tracking, sensors, near-perfect situational awareness, they called it, a common operational picture, or COP,
So they could see everything.
Pretty much everything happening right now. But did it let them predict what AQI would do next? Not really.
Like the meteorologist knowing where every butterfly is, but still not predicting the hurricane perfectly?
Exactly that analogy. There are always tiny deviations, hidden interactions you can't track, that have massive consequences.
Like Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia.
Perfect example. Maybe data could predict his likely actions, but not the spark it would ignite, the cascade across the region. That was about the complex, interconnected environment.
So resilience thinking, what does that look like practically?
It's about accepting you can't predict everything. So instead of building rigid walls against known threats,
Which might fail against unknown ones.
right, you build systems that can absorb shocks, adapt, maybe even get stronger from them. That's Nassim Taleb's anti-fragile idea.
It's the opposite of predictive hubris. It's admitting we don't know what we don't know.
Precisely. And expecting the unexpected. The book contrasts this with things like the Dutch Delta, worked brilliant engineering, incredibly robust against design for threats.
But maybe fragile if something completely unforeseen happens.
Potentially, yeah. It's robust but rigid. Less inherently resilient than the messy natural system it tries to control.
And this connects back to efficiency versus adaptability.
Directly. Efficiency is about maximizing output for a given input. Great if the environment is stable and you know what output is needed.
But if the environment changes,
Being super efficient at making the wrong thing is useless or worse. Drucker's famous line. Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing.
and in complex situations, those two can diverge.
Dramatically. But the book argues the task force got very good at doing things right, executing their plans efficiently, but they were too inflexible to consistently do the right thing as the situation changed.
So they had to change fundamentally, become adaptable.
Exactly. And the book is clear. There was no manual for this. They were figuring it out as they went, redesigning the plane in mid-flight.
While AQI, through trial and error,
Had evolved this adaptable, messy, maybe inefficient, but ultimately effective network that could operate in the task force's blind spots.
those contrasting airline examples are striking here. United 173 and U.S. Airways 1549.
Yeah, really powerful. Flight 173 crashes despite having fuel, following procedures because the captain was the sole decision maker, focused on one problem.
While the crew didn't feel empowered to push back harder about the fuel state.
Right. Contrast that with Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson. Unprecedented dual-engine failure. But the crew acted as a team. Shared awareness, quick adaptation, empowered first officer.
They landed safely because they were adaptable, not just following a checklist for an event nobody had planned for.
Exactly. Which leads into the discussion of elite teams, like Navy SEALs.
Their strength isn't just individual talent, the book says.
Less about individual superheroes, more about deep trust and shared purpose. BDS training, yeah, it's brutal physically, but it's really about forging that resilience, that teamwork, that belief in the mission.
So they learn each other inside out.
Intimately. They know how teammates react, they can anticipate, adapt, reconfigure on the fly. It's that dense connectivity. The trust plus the shared understanding and commitment, the purpose that lets them handle chaos.
And this idea scales up through emergence.
Yes. How complex patterns arise from simple, local interactions, like snowflakes or cities or markets.
Adam Smith's invisible hand.
That's an early example of emergence, contrasted with the visible hand of top-down management. In these really interactive situations, solutions can bubble up without a grand designer.
The book quotes someone, Johnson, I think, saying emergence produces unpredictable creativity.
Right, fueled by connectedness and organization. The key isn't just having more people, more SEALs, more computers. It's how they're integrated, that wiring of trust and purpose.
So building a team of teams is about both managing the functions and letting solutions emerge.
It's both. You need to intentionally weave the elements together, but also guide rather than dictate the work.
So the task force's challenge was scaling that SEAL team adaptability to the entire massive organization, moving from a command of teams
to a true team of teams. Because the individual teams were great, but the overall structure was siloed, slow.
They needed to scale trust and purpose without it becoming chaos.
Exactly. That's where the book contrasts. MEC structures those neat, separate boxes with few connections.
Like traditional military chains of command or corporate org charts.
Or even Captain McBroom's hierarchical flight deck on Flight 173.
With a non-MEC structure. Messy, overlapping connections, like a real team network.
That's the goal structure. And other organizations have realized this need for more connection.
Like the Brigham and Women's Hospital response to the Boston bombing.
Yes, their success was largely down to a pre-existing culture of teamwork built through daily interaction. But even they struggled with tracking patients across departments seamlessly during the crisis. Enterprise-level shared awareness is hard.
And the To Err's Human report highlights systemic communication failures in healthcare more broadly.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
It points to a lack of systemic understanding. And you see it in business, too. Joel Peterson's point about rigidity killing startups as they scale, or Hackman's research on how managing bigger teams gets exponentially harder. Brooks' Law.
So the foundation for this team of teams is what the book calls shared consciousness.
That's the core concept. And it's built on two pillars: systemic understanding and strong lateral connectivity.
Okay, systemic understanding first. What's that about?
It's about everyone having a holistic view, understanding the bigger picture, how the different parts fit together, what the overall goal is, not just focusing on your own little piece.
Like those BUDS trainees the book mentions, who initially only care about their own performance.
Exactly. Silos encourage that inward focus. Information gets hoarded, sometimes for security, sometimes just because processes are rigid. Think Adam Smith's pin factory, hyper-specialized. Nobody knows the whole process.
Or that funny fable of the Krasnovian soccer team?
Yes, satirizing rigid plans that ignore the complex reality on the field. Systemic understanding is the antidote to that.
Kennedy's moonshot speech is used as a positive example, right? Setting a huge shared goal.
A brilliant example. He set this incredibly audacious goal: land on the moon within the decade, even admitting the technology didn't exist yet.
New metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented.
Exactly. That forced everyone across disciplines, across organizations, to collaborate and share information intensely. NASA's success versus the European LDO program's failures is partly attributed to NASA's better systems management, better information flow.
Because rocket science is incredibly complex, all those interacting parts.
Vibrations, interference, gravity, everything affects everything else. Mueller's role at NASA was crucial, bringing in daily data reviews, a central control room acting like an early internet, forcing engineers to share problems and solutions.
Even engineers who didn't like systems management had to admit it was necessary.
They saw it was the only way to solve the problems. And workplace design plays a role, too.
How so?
Historically, office layouts reinforce silos, separate offices, cubicles, the symbolic corner office for the boss.
Compared to Michael Bloomberg deliberately creating open bullpen offices.
Right, at his company and later at City Hall. To force interaction, cross-pollination of ideas. His quote is great. It's the lack of walls that really makes them do it.
So how did the task force build this systemic understanding day to day?
The main tool was the Operations and Intelligence Brief, the O&I.
Okay, what was that?
It started small, but grew into this huge daily video conference. Thousands of people dialing in, operators, analysts, different agencies, different locations.
Wow, how did that even work?
It worked because the guiding principle became radical information sharing. The mantra was, share information until you're afraid it's illegal.
Seriously.
That was the mindset shift required. It forced operators and analysts to talk directly, understand each other's worlds. Suddenly, the context behind the intelligence became much clearer.
Wasn't it incredibly inefficient with so many people?
You'd think so, but apparently not. The richness and timeliness of the shared information made it incredibly valuable. It became a key leadership tool too, conveying intent, building motivation across the whole network.
And it wasn't just dry briefings.
No, it became interactive, more about why are you thinking that than just how many insurgents did you see, deeper understanding.
Of course, sharing that much information has risks. WikiLeaks, Snowden.
The book acknowledges that paradox, definitely. More secrets, but potentially accessible to more people. It's a tension you have to manage.
Okay, so that's systemic understanding. The other pillar was strong lateral connectivity, building bridges between silos.
Exactly. And they did that mainly through embedding personnel and creating strong liaison officer programs, LNOs.
Sending people to work directly inside other agencies.
Yes, and crucially, sending top people, even if it meant taking them off the front line temporarily. And then empowering those LNOs with a constant flow of intelligence so they were genuinely valuable to their hosts.
So it wasn't just a token position.
No, they became vital nodes in the network. A good LNO relationship could cut through bureaucracy instantly when urgent information was needed. Plus, the increased use of ISR drones and sensors provided real-time data that could be shared laterally much faster.
And this focus on cooperation and trust connects to game theory, tit for tat.
Yeah, the book makes that link. Tit-for-tat strategy and the prisoner's dilemma. Start by cooperating, then just mirror what the other guy did last time.
Simple but effective.
Very. It defaults to trust, punishes selfishness, but forgives quickly. It fosters cooperation.
Can you give that example of how this all came together in a real raid?
Sure, they're raiding a target. Overhead recon spots a second unexpected vehicle arriving. Instantly, that info goes not just up the chain, but sideways to analysts, to the guys on the ground.
Because they have that shared picture.
Right. Everyone sees it, understands the potential implications. The ground commander doesn't need to wait for orders from way up high. Based on the shared context, he makes the call. Grab the second vehicle, too.
And it turns out to be important.
Yes, leads to capturing a key AQI figure they weren't even looking for initially. That's shared consciousness and action systemic understanding, plus lateral connections enabling rapid, adaptive decisions. It let the whole task force act like one agile team.
So they managed to break down their silos. But the book warns that silos are really persistent, using General Motors as a cautionary tale.
A really stark one.
Oh.
Alfred Sloan's model at GM was the gold standard for efficiency for decades, structured siloed divisions.
But eventually.
That lack of cross-silo communication, intense internal competition, it crippled them. The anecdote about the CEO not even knowing about a task force he'd created? Unbelievable.
And the ignition switch disaster.
Tragic. Deaths resulted because information about the faulty switches just didn't travel between silos or up the chain for years. The GM nod, passing the buck, became symbolic. The CEO and top lawyer were unaware for 12 years.
Shocking. A huge contrast with Alan Mulally turning Ford around.
Absolutely. Mulally's One Ford was all about smashing silos. His weekly business plan review meetings demanded total honesty, transparency, no secrets, no side deals, one team.
And Sandy Pentland's research on social physics reinforces this.
Yeah, his work shows how interaction patterns, who talks to whom, how often are huge predictors of team performance and creativity. Engagement within the team, exploration outside the team, both vital.
So the task force's O&I and embedding programs were basically engineering better interaction patterns.
That's a good way to put it. They built systemic understanding and lateral trust. But there was still one piece missing.
Speed.
Speed of decision-making. Even with shared consciousness, if every significant decision still had to go up and down the formal chain of command.
It's too slow. The paradox of instant communication but slow decisions.
Exactly. They could see the right thing to do faster, but actually doing it was still hampered by the old structure.
And the book argues this comes from that historical link between visibility and control.
Right. Commodore Perry needing broad authority in Japan because communication was impossible, versus General Grant giving more specific orders during the Civil War because he could communicate relatively easily.
So the more you can see, the more you want to control.
Often, yes. But the book's argument is that in today's complexity, you can't control everything. There are too many variables. So you have to deliberately push power down, empower people.
That quote about needing employees to fight back against angry tweets.
Burnoff and Shadler, yeah. In a world of instant social media fires, you can't wait for HQ approval to respond. Companies like United, Maytag, Nestlé learned that the hard way.
Contracted with Best Buy's 12th Fort.
Where employees were empowered to jump on Twitter and solve customer problems directly. Real-time empowerment.
And the task force eventually moved to this, giving operators more authority.
Yes, by giving them the context. General Officer Information and Awareness, the book calls it. Shift the model. Leaders provide information and intent, so subordinates can exercise initiative intelligently.
Not just leaders command, subordinates inform.
The reverse, almost. Leaders enable subordinates by sharing the big picture. The Ops Center at Ballad became a physical manifestation of this game. Screens everywhere, real-time feeds, shared logs. Everyone saw the battlefield together.
Like Captain Ramius in Hunt for Red October, calmly discussing books while torpedoes are in the water. Focus on the big picture, trust the team.
Yeah, that's a nice analogy for the required mindset, yeah. Trusting the system you've built, not getting fixated on every immediate threat like the first officer was.
So the leader's role changes completely.
It has to. You move from being the chess master, trying to control every single move, which is impossible in complex environments,
To be
a gardener, eyes on, hands off. Your job is to cultivate the environment, the connections, the information flow, the trust, the shared purpose, so the organization itself can adapt and thrive. You tend the ecosystem.
Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive on Team of Teams. The big takeaways seem to be Moving past pure efficiency to adaptability is crucial now.
Absolutely essential.
Traditional hierarchies and trying to predict everything just don't cut it in complexity.
They're too brittle, too slow.
And the answer lies in building this team of teams, which means fostering shared consciousness.
So that blend of systemic understanding
Yeah.
and strong lateral connection.
And then, critically, empowering people to act on that shared understanding.
Decentralized execution based on shared context and trust.
So for you, listening, as you think about your own team, your own organization, especially in that dynamic environment you mentioned.
Yeah, the provocative thought to leave you with is,
Yeah.
where are your opportunities? How can you foster more of that systemic view? Build stronger connections across your team or even between teams.
And maybe the toughest part, where can you genuinely empower people to take initiative, to act decisively when the unexpected happens?
It's about asking yourself, are you trying to be the chess master, controlling every move? Or are you ready to shift towards being the gardener, cultivating the conditions for your team to adapt and succeed on its own?
That's the challenge, moving from control to enablement.
That's the journey Team of Teams describes, a fundamental shift in leadership and organization for a complex world.